There is a photograph in a drawer that most people don't look at anymore. It isn't hidden exactly, just tucked beneath other things, the way certain memories are. A woman in her 40s finds it while looking for something else entirely, and for a moment she just sits there, holding it, looking at a face she used to know and a version of herself she hasn't thought about in years. She doesn't smile right away. She studies it, and something in her chest tightens, not with regret, but with the memory of how complicated it once was to simply love someone. For a long time, people believed they understood exactly what it meant when a black woman chose to date a white man. They assumed it was a statement, a rejection, a signal about who she thought she was, or who she no longer wanted to be. Family members whispered about it. Friends had opinions they didn't always keep to themselves. Strangers online felt entitled to comment on a stranger's heart. And somewhere in the middle of all that noise, the woman herself rarely got asked the one question that actually mattered, not why him, but why did it feel different? Because that's usually where the real story begins. Not with rejection, but with relief. Many women who found themselves in this kind of relationship describe a specific, quiet sensation the first time someone chose them without hesitation, without conditions, without the exhausting need to prove themselves first. It wasn't about race. It was about finally exhaling. For a woman who had spent years being strong, being capable, being the one everyone depended on, being chosen, simply and plainly, without having to earn it first, could feel like something close to rest. That need for rest is not weakness. It's human. Psychologists who study identity and belonging often point out that people are drawn toward whoever offers them safety, and safety doesn't always look the way we expect. Sometimes it looks like being believed the first time you speak. Sometimes it looks like not having to translate yourself before someone understands you. For many black women, especially those raised in environments where strength was expected before softness was ever offered, that kind of ease can feel unfamiliar and deeply moving when it finally arrives. Think of the woman who spent her 20s being everyone's dependable one, the friend who organized things, the daughter who never complained, the co-worker who stayed late without being asked. She grew skilled at anticipating what other people needed before they said it out loud. It made her valuable. It also made her tired in a way she didn't have words for yet. So when someone came along who noticed her before she had to perform for him, who asked how her day was and actually waited for the answer, it didn't feel like a small thing. It felt like being seen for the first time in years. Still, the judgment came. It almost always does, when a woman's private choice becomes public conversation. What's rarely acknowledged is that most of that judgment was never really about her. It was about something older, something the community had carried for generations, old wounds around loyalty, around protection, around the fear of losing one another to a world that hasn't always made room for black love to be simple. When an aunt raised an eyebrow at a photograph, when a grandmother offered a warning disguised as advice, it wasn't cruelty. It was history speaking through her, trying, in its own imperfect way, to protect something it was afraid of losing. That doesn't mean the criticism didn't hurt. It did. But understanding where it came from can change how a woman carries it. There's a difference between criticism that wants to protect you and criticism that wants to control you, even when the two sound almost identical in the moment. A mother's worry about her daughter's safety in an unfamiliar family, in unfamiliar rooms, is not the same as a stranger's need to police who deserves to be loved and how. Learning to tell those apart takes years. Some women never fully get the chance to sort it out, because the voices arrive all at once, tangled together, and there isn't always someone standing nearby to help her separate the ones that come from love and the ones that come from fear of being left behind. Picture a young girl, years earlier, sitting in a classroom where she is the only one who looks like her. She learns early how to adjust her voice, her posture, her laugh, depending on who's in the room. She becomes fluent in translation before she's even old enough to understand why it's necessary. That skill follows her into adulthood, the ability to read a room, to soften herself for other people's comfort. And so when she finally meets someone who doesn't require that translation, who simply likes her as she already is, it can feel less like betrayal and more like being handed back a part of herself she didn't know she'd been rationing. There's a particular kind of Sunday dinner many of these women remember, plates passed around a crowded table, gospel playing low from another room, the specific warmth of a kitchen that's been cooking since morning. And somewhere in that warmth, a comment lands. Not shouted. Just said, the way difficult things often are, folded into a conversation about something else entirely. She remembers the silence that followed it. She remembers deciding, in that moment, not to explain herself. Not because she didn't care what they thought, but because she had grown tired of defending a choice that had never needed defending in the first place. Research on interracial relationships often focuses on statistics, how often they happen, how public opinion has shifted over decades, how attitudes differ across generations. But numbers rarely capture what it actually feels like to live inside one of those data points. What the research does help explain is why the reaction was so strong to begin with. Studies on identity and group belonging show that communities under long-standing social pressure often develop a heightened sensitivity to anything that feels like it might weaken the group from within. It isn't usually personal. It's protective, even when it doesn't feel that way to the person receiving it. And there's something else the research quietly confirms, that relationship satisfaction has far less to do with race than most people assume, and far more to do with respect, communication, and whether two people feel safe enough to be honest with each other. That single fact reframes almost everything. The question was never really why him. It was always, does he see me? It also helps to remember that this was never only a story about romance. It was about a woman learning, slowly and sometimes painfully, what it meant to belong to herself first. Belonging to a community matters. It shapes language, memory, humor, faith, the rhythm of a household. But belonging that requires a woman to erase her own needs in order to keep it isn't really belonging at all. It's a quieter kind of exile, one that asks her to stay small in exchange for staying welcome. Later in life, many of these women look back with a kind of clarity that only comes with distance. They think about the version of themselves who once needed to be chosen so badly that it shaped who she let herself love. They think about the criticism they absorbed quietly, the explanations they gave that no one had actually asked for, the small ways they shrank themselves to keep peace in rooms that were never really at peace with them to begin with. There's a stillness that settles into a woman around this age, not resignation, but something closer to arrival. She sits at her kitchen table some evening, coffee gone cold beside her, and she isn't thinking about defending anything anymore. She's simply remembering. The relationship may have ended years ago, or it may still be her life today. Either way, what's changed isn't the relationship. It's her relationship to her own choices. It would be dishonest to say the community's concern came from nowhere. Black love has survived things most people will never have to understand. Laws that once made it illegal to love across those lines, generations who fought simply for the right to protect their families, histories of being underestimated, undervalued, and unseen. That pain doesn't disappear just because time passes. It shows up in warnings disguised as wisdom, in silences at dinner tables, in the instinct to hold on tightly to whoever and whatever feels familiar. Understanding that doesn't excuse the hurt it sometimes caused. But it does make the hurt easier to hold with compassion instead of resentment. What tends to shift, eventually, is not the woman's love for her community, but her definition of loyalty. She begins to understand that honoring where she comes from and choosing who makes her feel safe are not opposing forces. She doesn't have to pick one. She was never actually required to. That belief, that she had to choose between belonging and being loved, was never entirely true. It was simply the story she inherited, the same way her grandmother inherited hers. There's a particular kind of peace that comes from no longer needing anyone's approval for a decision that was always hers to make. It doesn't arrive all at once. It builds slowly, in quiet moments. A conversation with an old friend who finally just listens, a walk taken alone after a hard visit home, a photograph found in a drawer that no longer needs an explanation attached to it. Some of these women eventually became the ones offering wisdom themselves, a niece asking, hesitantly, what to do about a family member's disapproval, a younger coworker wondering aloud whether love is supposed to feel this complicated. And what she tells them, usually, isn't advice about race at all. It's something simpler. That the people who truly love you make room for your happiness, even the kind they don't fully understand. That the ones who can't do that are usually wrestling with something that has very little to do with you. And that peace, Real peace rarely comes from winning an argument about your own life. It comes from quietly deciding you no longer need to have that argument at all. She looks at that picture now, the one from all those years ago, and something has changed in how she sees it. Not the face in the photo. Her own. She isn't the woman who needed to defend herself anymore. She isn't the girl translating herself for a room that wasn't ready to understand her. She's simply a woman who once loved someone, in a world that had opinions about it, and who has finally stopped asking for permission to have lived her own life. The photograph goes back in the drawer. Not hidden this time. Just kept, the way people keep the parts of themselves they've made peace with.